Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-empowerment. Future Squared brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you and your company stay relevant in an era of rapid change and 10x your results in both your professional and personal life. Each week, I'll bring you corporate innovators, entrepreneurs, authors, keynote speakers, and thought leaders such as Steve Blank, David Allen, Brad Feld, Tim Harford, Karen Dillon, Jenny Blake, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, Pascal Finette, Ryan Blair, and Ash Moria, to name just a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you Fast Fix Friday, some quick, digestible insights to help you end your week on a high as you head off for the weekend. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub, school and consultancy based in Melbourne, Australia and Singapore that works with companies to help them adopt the mindset, methods and tools to navigate change and survive and thrive in an era of rapid disruption. If your organization needs help coming up with ideas, testing and turning ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to Future Squared for episode number 189 with David Mead. David is an author and igniter for Simon Sinek, author of 3 best-selling books, Start With Why, Leaders Eat Last, and Together Is Better. Simon and David have just penned and released Find Your Why, a practical guide for discovering purpose for you and your team. Everything David does is designed to propel people forward towards a better version of themselves, so that they can meaningfully touch the lives of others. David believes that every one of us deserves to wake up inspired to go to work, feel safe while there, and come home at the end of the day fulfilled by the work we do. He works with leaders to help them create an environment where people show up to work because they want to, not because they have to. Expect to learn many things in this episode, including 1. How to embed a start with why mindset in a fast-growing team. 2. What to do if your why sounds just like your competitors. And 3. How to deal with team members who don't buy into your organization's why. So with that, I bring you the one and only David Mead. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, and I think you're the first guest we've had on the show all the way from sunny Salt Lake City.
Hey, and it does happen to be sunny today, so that's great.
There you go. So I guess just before we got on the call, we're talking about the show and how we have such a broad sort of array of guests joining us, whether it's neuroscientists, geopolitical strategists, but a concept or a topic that always comes up when we're talking about entrepreneurship and people putting something new into the world and creating impact is finding your purpose, because your purpose ultimately, once you've found that, it's much easier to keep going. So, with Start With Why, Simon Sinek started a movement that ultimately inspired people to go out into the world and do the things that inspire them. And now you've co-written the follow-up along with Simon and Peter Docker, Find Your Why, which is a practical guide for discovering purpose for you and your team. And it's now sitting inside the top 200 on Amazon. It's top 10 in a number of categories. So first up, congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really exciting to see it come to life finally.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how did the collaboration with Simon and Peter come about?
Well, it's been, this book has been years in the making. So I first met Simon in 2009, and I was just working at a little startup here in Salt Lake City, and Simon came to speak as a guest speaker, and this was before, his TED Talks or books or anything. Nobody really knew who the guy was. And so that's when I initially met him and learned about this concept of the golden circle, and really just took to it and started using it in my own work. And about 9 or 10 months after I met Simon, I was invited to come and help with a couple of side projects that he had. And so I gladly did that while I was still working my full-time job. And then in about 2011, I was able to join him full-time. So, and right about that time is when Peter sort of came on the scene as well. He just, the way that we met Peter, he just sent an email in one day. Peter's based in the UK. And he said, I love this work, love what you're doing. I've adopted it in some of the work that I'm doing as well. Wasn't asking for anything, was just sort of, thanking us for the work that we did. And I don't know what it was, but I kept that email, and I thought to myself, there's something about this guy. And I don't know what it is, but I just hung on to it. And so long story short, Simon happened to be in London, and I was able to set up a meeting between him and Peter, and they got along like two old ladies, and so that's kind of where it came. And then so Peter and I, for the last 5 years or so, have been doing why discovery workshops with individuals and with organizations, and the idea came up of there's so many organizations that are not able to bring us in, or obviously with just the three of us, Simon, Peter, and I, we just can't get out to see all the organizations that want to take part in this work. And so we thought, well, why don't we just write it down and give it away? So that's what we did, and that's how, well, give it away figuratively speaking, it's about $20, but still not bad for what we basically do in person. Written down with a step-by-step so that other people can do it as well.
Awesome. Well, that's one way to get scale. And I guess, the narrative for a lot of people today, David, is all about, wake up, go to work, deal with the boss, make some money, go home, deal with your personal life, go to bed, wake up, repeat, day in, day out, right? That's plenty of things we already have to deal with, plenty of stuff going on in our minds all the time. The monkey mind is something that we won't get into, but we're always running at 240 kilometers an hour, or say 150 miles an hour. If we're going to convert that.
Close enough. Yeah.
So why get fancy by trying to also understand why you do what you do?
Well, it's interesting that you put it that way, because this idea of meaning and purpose and fulfillment this is like naturally what we seek for as human beings. Mm-hmm. It's not fancy. Like, this is, if you think about life outside of work, we, as much as we can, our time and energy doing the things that we love to do, that we enjoy doing, being with the people that we enjoy being with. And for some reason, we have sort of, divorced ourselves from that mindset when we go to work. And now when we go to work, it's all about, how much money am I going to make, and what are the benefits that I get, and what are the perks, and what's my time off, and all this kind of stuff. When the need or the desire for purpose and meaning has not diminished when we go to work, we still deserve to have it there too. And so I think the why is at two levels. There's the individual why, which is, what is it that drives and inspires us to get out of bed every day, and inspires us in all of the interactions that we have at work or at home, because our why is basically who we are wherever we are. And then at the bigger level is, as an organization, understanding our purpose and our cause and our belief, and the really the human reason that we exist, that can inspire people that believe what we believe to come and work for us, and to inspire clients and customers to come and buy from us and do business with us. It's the same thing. We just, for some reason, we don't naturally seem to gravitate toward that at work like we do in our personal lives.
Yeah, and I guess there's probably a lot of reasons for that, but I guess I'm keen to explore the awareness piece first before we go any further. So, what you said there is 100% spot on. I see it all the time. People look for fulfillment and purpose in their personal lives, but for some reason, there's this disconnect once they get into the office or wherever their place of business happens to be. And maybe there's just a lack of, say, awareness, that people don't realize that, hey, work can be a fulfilling place too. And I guess there's just that word work. People see it as, I've got to go to work. And it's kind of seen as, and the whole concept of work-life balance suggests life begins outside of, 9 to 5 or whatever your office hours are, not necessarily when you're in the office creating impact or working towards something greater than yourself.
Right. And, it goes back to, again, the simplest things. You think about when we were kids, nobody said, geez, I really want to be an astronaut when I grow up, and I hope I hate it.
Exactly.
We don't, whether we knew what we wanted to be when we grew up or not, we had a dream of doing something that we love to do, that we would want to go do every day. And I think what happens is, we graduate university and we get into these, into a system or an institution where it's not that way. And at first we sort of resist it, and we don't like it. And then we just think, well, I guess this is how it is. And we start to accept it. And then before too long, if we're not careful, we just end up perpetuating it. And I think there's the fundamental shift that needs to happen in our perception of what work is. And that, we all deserve to find meaning and fulfillment in the work that we do. And until we sort of shift that perception, nothing's really going to change.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you touched on a key point there around social indoctrination. Like you get into a workplace and you're looking forward to it. Maybe you're fresh-faced, you've just graduated from university and you've gone into some big consulting firm and you've realized that hey, it's not all it's cracked up to be. It's not all it is on say House of Cards or something like that,
Right.
or House of Lies rather. And but you look around and you see everyone else sort of in the same boat, and you just kind of concede that, oh well, this must be the way it is, so I guess I'd better just make do with it and start living for the weekend.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, yeah,
a
definitely.
horrible way to live.
It's definitely a horrible way to live, and as someone who's left the corporate world to pursue his own startup, I couldn't agree more with that being a horrible way to live. So on finding your why, it seems that it's something that's quite difficult for a lot of people. I know I've had countless conversations, especially with people who, ask about the entrepreneurial sort of ecosystem, and they're like, "Oh, I'd love to do something." And my question is always, "Well, what are you into? What's your passion? Where do you spend your time? What are your extracurricular interests?" And oftentimes they come back and say, well, I don't really have any. And it just breaks my heart when I hear that, because I think, what do you mean? It's just such a huge world. There's so much going on out there for us to explore and to get enamored by, but you've got nothing going on. So is this something you come across often in your work, David?
Yes. And most of the individual why discovery work that we do is with individuals within a larger organization. And so, I mean, obviously, and Find Your Why, the book, is actually half of it is designed for entrepreneurs or solopreneurs or those who are out there trying to do something new. But I have friends and even, myself to a certain extent at a point in my life was like, I mean, like I like to snowboard, but I don't know how I'm going to monetize that.
Yeah.
Right? So we have this. I think the thing that I'm realizing more and more as the years go by is that it's possible for, when we discover and articulate our own why, it's possible that may very clearly lead to some specific industry or, product or service. And we have to be open to the fact that it might not. And it's less about the job, it's less about the role, it's less about the product or the service, and it's more about the way we show up as human beings. Because the why is really a representation of who we are when we're at our very best, and it's the contribution that we make and the impact that we have on the lives of other people. So when we understand what that is, when we understand how people thrive when they're around us because of the way that we treat them or because of the impact that we have on them, we can really do anything. So, I mean, yes, it's great to be passionate about the product or the service that you have, but if it's not something that you absolutely love, but it's something that you've fallen into or something you just have a natural knack for, that business or that product, that service can be the vehicle, that can be the fuel that helps you to bring your why to life, to start an organization, to bring in people, where you can build a culture around this thing this people perspective or this people component that you love to do. So on a grander scale, I'll give you an example. There's a manufacturing company that we have a great relationship with. It's called Barry Waymiller. They're based here in the United States, but they have operations all over the world. Their why is all about growing people into leaders. What they do is it's a manufacturing company. They build huge machines that, create cardboard boxes, for example. Yeah. It totally disconnected, but their why does not rely on their product. It's all about the culture that they're building. It's all about the human difference that they're making in the lives of their own people. So I use that I realize it's a different example than an entrepreneurial example. However, the point is, you don't have to go in and start a business with a product or service that necessarily directly relates to your why. Your why could simply be it is the human reason that you do what you do. And, you might do that selling cars. You might do that starting a tech company. It doesn't really matter what you do. Your why just helps you to show up in the right way.
Yeah, and I like what you said there about the manufacturing company reframing effectively their purpose. I mean, rather than saying, well, we create or we produce X number of widgets and distribute them around the world, it's more about, well, we build leaders. And a similar one that I'm quite fond of is when I think of, say, a garbage cleaner. You might say that, well, your role is to empty the bins, but no, your role is actually to keep the streets clean, so kids have somewhere clean to play effectively. That could be the way you reframe
Totally.
it. It's a totally different way of looking at things. And also what you said about snowboarding there, you might enjoy snowboarding, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's your purpose, right? I mean, and I've had guests on the show before. Jenny Blake was one who said, look, it's one thing to chase your passion. You might be passionate about a lot of things, but it's probably not something you can effectively monetize. And purpose and passion could be something quite self-serving. Like, yeah, I like snowboarding. Maybe I'm even passionate about snowboarding, but that's a very self-serving thing. Whereas would you say purpose is something that is more about not necessarily serving yourself, but all about serving others in some way?
Absolutely. That's one of the main things that we talk about. Why is that it is the contribution and the impact that you make to the lives of other people. So discovering your why is great for you or great for ourselves individually, because it allows us to understand what it is that drives us. The only way we really get legs from that, or the way we really get fulfillment, is by giving it away, by doing it for somebody else. Absolutely. Yeah,
love it. So I wanted to, given that we've got a large entrepreneurial audience, touch, or I suppose explore a little bit further the organizational why. So we've kind of explored it on the surface there, talking about the manufacturing organization. And, Jeff Bezos is quoted and often requoted a million times as saying, you've got to be firm on vision but flexible on the details. And that vision is often all about the purpose of the organization. So I guess that kind of aligns with what you were just saying about, hey, you've got a particular purpose, but it doesn't mean that your purpose needs to 100% align with the product or the service that you're putting out into the market. Like, the details can vary, but it's all geared towards that vision, that purpose that the company is premised on.
Absolutely. And I think, there are a couple of great examples of that. One is the Virgin companies that have, every possible imaginable product or service out there.
Yep.
And yet the thing that ties them all together is Richard Branson's why, which is making a positive impact on the lives of millions of people. Another great one that I like to use a lot is Elon Musk. He's has a very clear vision and purpose, which is a sustainable and happy future for humanity. Every single one of his products, companies that he has, as disparate and seemingly different as they might be, Tesla, Solar City, SpaceX, the Boring Company now. He's also just launched this week, this new, I don't even know what to call it. It's like a low orbit rocket that you can travel anywhere in the world in under 60 minutes, right?
Saw that.
So all of this different stuff. And I mean, there's obviously some similarities to, in Tesla and Solar City to sustainability and, green energy, that kind of stuff. But you get all these seemingly different things, but what ties them all together is that the purpose or the cause, the belief that these guys have. And some people look at them and they're like, man, they're crazy. And some people look at them and say, man, how inspiring that they've got something so big that they're working toward, that, they can do whatever they want as long as it's driving toward that higher cause or purpose.
Yeah. And I think that's also a key point there for entrepreneurs to remember, is that if you have that greater cause or purpose, it does empower you to get up in the morning with that spring in your step and just go for it. Whereas if you haven't got that, you might get into business by identifying, say, there's a gap in the market for X, and you'll go after that. But after a year or two, you're finding that you're struggling to really, gain traction, get market share, and because you're devoid of purpose, you just end up giving up. Whereas if your purpose is there, it's like a previous guest on the show, Brad Stolberg, author of Peak Performance. I love the way he put it. He basically said purpose is the world's #1 performance enhancer. Because if that's driving you, you've got no issue getting out there and giving it your all day in, day out, because you really believe in what you're doing. But if that's not there, then eventually you're just going to say, well, this is just too hard.
Yeah, and the other amazing thing is that just because you have clear vision or purpose doesn't mean that everything's always going to go great. I mean, Tesla, again, is a great example. They've been on the brink of bankruptcy twice. Their production schedule is horrendous. They've never launched a product on time. They've got all these challenges and problems and things that have come up. And having a clear why or vision or purpose does not mean that you will like your job every day. What it does mean is that you can love your job every day, right? It gets you having that look at the horizon pulls you through some of those tough times, the challenges and the tough days where you don't want to get out of bed, because you have something bigger that you're working toward. And so that's what keeps you going.
Yeah. And just to continue on the Elon Musk line, I mean, Tesla was one, and then SpaceX, I think it was 3 times their rocket blew up midair before they finally made it into orbit on the 4th attempt. And, since then they've managed to reuse rockets and all sorts of stuff, but they had to become comfortable with failure. And, the purpose didn't change, but the journey they took to get there was fraught with ups and downs and backward steps and all sorts of stuff. But that's just the nature of the beast. But because they were driven by this greater purpose, they were willing to get through, to walk through fire to get to where they wanted to go.
Right. And you look at these companies that we look at as being so innovative and being the leaders in the market for innovation. You have to be comfortable with mistakes, with screwing up, with with failure, because that's where innovation comes from.
Couldn't agree more. So on the 3 levels that we're required to be 3 levels that we need to function on in order to be successful, whether it's a business or whether it's an individual career. So in the book, you guys talk about we need to know what we do, we need to know how we do it, and we need to know why we do it. And if you have those 3 in alignment, then, there are no guarantees, but then you've got everything you need to work towards a successful career.
Sure. And it's interesting too, because the key between those or among those 3 things is balance, right? It's not that it's all about the why. No. It's not that you have to spend a majority of your time on the why. The reason that we talk so much about it is because that's the piece that's usually ignored or forgotten. So, if you're, for example, pitching a client or launching a new product or whatever it is, it's start with why, right? So depending on the audience, depending on the context, depending on the situation, you might spend 30 seconds talking about your why, or you might spend 15 minutes talking about your why. And then you're going to move to the how and the what, which are also extremely important components. So that's the one thing I think it's really important to understand is start with why, not only why. You have to be good at how and you have to be good at what. The why is just the place to start rather than starting with what, which is the way most organizations do it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whoever and didn't know the first thing about whether it was web development or whether it was astrophysics or anything along those lines, then chances are your why could be whatever it was, but unless you know the what or the how, then you're not going to get very far. So I think it's great that you guys have made that distinction in the book rather than just focusing on why, or purpose. Like a lot of, say, rhetoric out there, it does delve into the next thing, and it's easier to just read start with why and think, oh, well, that's it. But it's start with why, like you said. Right. So if I'm an organization and we've defined our purpose and we've rallied our troops around that, everybody's bought in, what if we have, say, a number of other organizations in our industry who more or less have a similar why? Is that something we should be concerned with, or?
No. And that's an interesting question, which actually comes up a lot. When we help an organization do, a tribe-wide discovery, as we call it, one of the questions that usually comes up is, well, what if somebody else in our industry has a why that's the same as ours? Mm-hmm. It's important to realize that the goal of this exercise is not to come up with a why that is distinct and separate and different than everybody else, because that just puts you on an island, right? Mm-hmm. It's very likely that another organization that has gone through a similar process may have a very similar why to you. So 2 points on that. One is that's actually a good thing, because if there's a possibility perhaps that you could join forces to build the world that you imagine, that's one great way to do it. Mm-hmm. And the second thing, if you're worried about competitive advantage or, seeming the same as somebody else, even though you might have a why that's similar to somebody else, what really sets an organization apart, or an individual for that matter, is the combination of your why and your hows. And your hows are your guiding principles, your beliefs, the sort of the daily actions that you take that represent who you are as an organization at your best. And the way that you operate, the way you do things, your culture will be different likely than the other organization. And so when you combine your why, that higher cause or purpose, with the daily actions that you take to bring that about, that's really kind of like your fingerprint. That's what sets you apart.
Yeah, and that makes sense because when I think about early stage entrepreneurs, when they say, well, there's nobody else out there doing what we're doing. And oftentimes that's a red flag for a lot of people because if your idea had any merit, surely on this world of 7 billion plus people, usually there's 10, 15, 20 other businesses at least exploring doing something like that or something similar, which just shows that, hey, there is a market for this because other people are thinking about it too. But like you've rightly alluded to there, it's not so much just about the why, it's also about the how. And Michael Dell always talks about ideas are a commodity, execution of them is not. And it's that execution, that how, that's going to differentiate you from another company down the road who has maybe even the exact same why, but hey, you guys are way better at executing.
Exactly. And, you said something interesting about, we're the only one that does what we do. Well, the thing about what you do is that's usually pretty easy to replicate.
Yeah.
What is very difficult to replicate is your culture, which is your why, the combination of your why and your hows, the thing that you have built around this cause or purpose or vision or belief that you have. Nobody can really take that away from you, which is the great thing.
Yeah, and you touched on culture there, and I mean, how do you go about creating or embedding a start with why mindset, say, in a small, fast-growing team? Because I've been in the startup game for about 5 years now, and you've always got so much going on. People are wearing so many hats because you're a small startup. You haven't got the liberty of having multiple departments where everybody just focuses on their separate sort of area. And yeah, I mean, I imagine in the work that you've done, you've helped to really embed that mindset within organizations. So if I'm a founder of a, say, 10-person startup, how do I go about doing that? What are some things I need to consider?
Sure. I think where it starts, and it might sound oversimplistic, but we find that this is where most organizations really fall flat. Talk about it, like communicate it, find a way to articulate it through stories that you tell. What tends to happen, and this is we find this in startups a lot. The founder of the organization has some human problem that he or she wants to solve, right? They couldn't do it anywhere else, so they start their own thing and they're passionate about it. They believe in it. They, bring in friends or family or a small group of people that is passionate about the same thing. They're, putting in, countless hours, not getting paid anything or, little, if anything, but they just show up every day and they have this fire, this passion for this love that they have for this new company.
Yeah.
And it's palpable. You can feel it when you show up every day. And then as the organization begins to grow and do better, you bring on, a few more people and now you're 10 instead of 3, right? And we're not having lunch together in the conference room anymore because we've all got so much stuff going on. And then the founder isn't hiring everybody anymore. They've hired somebody to hire everybody. And so you start to get this disconnect between that sort of that founder, that flame of the why, and everybody else. And then as the organization begins to grow, it's easier to start focusing on the metrics and numbers because we have spreadsheets for that.
Yeah.
And, we sort of become obsessed with the what. And if we're not consistently talking about it and reminding ourselves why we showed up to begin with, the why gets fuzzy. And then all of a sudden we're more focused on the what. And all of a sudden we don't know what happened, but it doesn't feel like it used to. And now it's like it's a job and it's not fun anymore. And we don't love coming to work anymore, but we don't know what happened. We don't know what changed. And what changed is just you forgot to talk about the why. So communicate it. Start every meeting with a story of why we do what we do. And in our own organization, we do the same thing because we're not immune to that. So we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep reminding ourselves and, write it down. Every email that you write, every pitch that you give, every conversation that you have, start with the reason that you started this whole thing to begin with.
Yeah. And I think what you said there about, as you get larger, hire more people, you hire a hiring manager to hire people for you, you've got your spreadsheets and your metrics. And, when startups talk about scaling issues, they're often talking about, the underlying systems and policies and getting more traction and entering new geographies and getting more customers on board and all that type of stuff. Oftentimes they overlook, well, how do we scale the culture or scale our why, which can be, like you said, easily overlooked because why should we care about that? Because metrics are so much easier to understand, right? It's black and white, It's numbers on a screen. But culture, that's, we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can only feel it, and we can only try and influence it through our actions and through, like you said, meetings, maybe sharing the values at town hall meetings and all sorts of stuff. But ultimately, it's easy to overlook that as the organization gets bigger.
Yep.
Yeah. Have you got any examples of organizations you guys have worked with where, say, they were in that sort of growth stage and they effectively manage that process well, or?
Yes, it's not a startup, but they had a very similar situation where they were growing extremely fast, and their main concern was, as we scale, as we bring on so many more people, as we're growing and we're adding new offices and all this kind of stuff, how do we make sure that why stays alive? And so we did a couple of years worth of leadership summits with them, with all of their senior leaders. But the first step to that was helping the organization already had a pretty well defined why. We helped them tweak that just a little bit, but then we helped the two major divisions within that organization articulate their own. We call it nested whys, right? So it's a why that's more specific to that particular business unit or division that sort of feeds into or aligns with the overarching why of the whole organization. So that was the first step, is really having a very simple, clear why statement, which again, in Find Your Why, the book that just came out, that's the whole goal, is to help an organization discover and articulate and write down in very simple terms, this is the contribution that we make and the impact that we have on the lives of people. And so that was kind of step one. And then working with the sort of the chief people officer of that organization, we helped through these leadership summits, helping them figure out what are some of the processes, the rituals, the habits that we have on a daily basis that we can incorporate this why, that we can incorporate our values and our hows into the daily things that we do. And this is a software company. So, when we are planning a new product, when we're upgrading our current product that we have, when we're communicating with our clients about what they need, I mean, everything in the context of this world that we're trying to build. And so it's the biggest thing is this can take time, especially if we have certain habits or things that we sort of fall into a rut. It's important for us to get away from that and to just, realize that it's chipping away at the daily little things that is going to make the change over the long term.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I guess I wanted to explore then this concept of, say, I don't know, a why or a purpose perhaps losing its shine after a while when you've repeated the same thing so many times. Like, for example, a lot of guys, like I guess Tim Ferriss talks about it, where, say, you might have some kind of a poster in your house that has some kind of a maxim on it, and it's supposed to remind you of something core to, say, your personal philosophy. But if you walk past that poster every single day for, say, 2 years on end, it's in the same spot. After a few days, after a few months, you don't even notice it. So what you need to do is move it to a different part in your house.
Sure.
Similar thing with mantras. People might say mantras, they might meditate, whatever, but after a while it loses its shine. So have you encountered that with organizations where people, they know the purpose, they hear it day in, day out, but because they hear it so often, they're just like, well, it doesn't mean anything to me anymore. I guess when it comes to really maintaining that purpose, is it a matter of perhaps humanizing it or telling stories or sharing videos of how the work your company or what the work your company is doing is actually creating that value in the market and working towards its purpose?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple things. One is, one of the things that we always encourage organizations to do is just like you said, to humanize it. So tell stories of specific employees or specific clients or customers that represent you living your why. And put that on a poster in the hallway, for example, and change that out every week or every month or every quarter or whatever. So that to kind of keep that fresh.
Yeah.
Looking at it even from a bigger sort of from 30,000 feet up, that sort of initiative of putting posters up of pictures and stories of people, that might just kind of lose its luster after 6 months. So you have to come up with something else, right? So I think there's a great deal of creativity. And with, a lot of companies nowadays, they've got, chief people officers or, it's more than an HR function. It's really a, kind of a chief of culture or those kind of roles. And I think it's giving responsibility to those folks to, use their creativity to kind of tap into, what does the organization need? How do they respond? What is it that really inspires them when it comes to sort of consuming our why, and how can we change things, and how can we keep things fresh and make sure that it stays top of mind in interesting ways, so that it doesn't just sort of become that bland thing that we just walk past and don't even notice anymore.
Yeah, so it's not just a matter of set it and forget it. You've constantly got to be thinking about, hey, where is the organization sort of awareness and engagement with our why, and is it sleeping? Should we be reevaluating how we communicate that?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. So I guess as we're scaling, we're trying to scale our why. What if we've got new people on board? Like you said, you might have a hiring manager who hires people, and then those people don't necessarily agree with the why. And for whatever reason, we try a lot of different things. We have meetings, we have posters, we share stories, we have customers come out and tell us how much we impacted their lives. But for whatever reason, they still can't agree with our why. What do we do then?
Well, if we could turn back the clock to when they were hired, that would be the first thing, right?
Of course.
So, being careful who we allow in, making sure that they align with our values and beliefs is step one. But let's say that we haven't done as good a job of that as we can, and now we've got these people who seem to be sort of out of place. I think it's important to understand that we control what we can control, right? We can't control other people. We can't get them to think in a certain way. The goal is not to convince them that the why is something that they should be inspired by. And so all we can do as leaders within organizations is just to create the environment that gives people the opportunity to be inspired. And what we find sometimes is, and we find this a lot in sort of like in government jobs, for example, where you've got people that are just there and they're never going to leave because they've got great benefits and a secure job. Most organizations, I understand, are not like that, but we'll still have some people that are as resistant, I would say. And so if we can just create an environment where we focus not on the people who are the squeaky wheel, not on the people who are not coming along, because the tendency is, we got to fix those people, but rather to put our focus on the people who do get it, on those who do want to help us build the right culture and foster that environment so that we build an environment where most people feel inspired by the work that they do and fulfilled when they go home at the end of the day. One of two things will probably happen. Those people who aren't great fits, who are a little bit resistant, will either come along because at their core, they probably would rather love their job and feel like they're doing something that matters than not. Or they may self-select out, because as human beings, we want to be in a place where we feel like we belong. And if we are in a situation where we don't feel like we belong, our tendency is to get out, to leave. And so we've seen people self-select out at that point as well. Or they may just stick around to be a thorn in your side. There's no guarantees, right? Yeah. But all we can do is control what we can control.
Yeah. Well, I guess the lesson there is not only focus on creating an environment to get your best performers or the people that align on board, but hey, just get the right people on the bus to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So can an organization have multiple whys, David?
Interesting question. And the answer is sort of.
That's a cop-out answer.
No, it's not. The answer is yes, but not in the way people may think. I mentioned a few minutes ago this concept of nested whys, right? So there can be multiple whys at an organization, but at different levels. Yeah. So an organization as a whole has one why only. So you don't have, for example, you would not have a why that is strictly for your internal culture and one why that is customer facing. The organization itself has one why, and the way that you treat your people inside, or the reason that you show up to work, should be just as applicable to your employees as it is to your clients or your customers. Where there can be other whys is nested within that organization. So if we have certain teams or business units or different groups within that organization, those particular business units can, if they choose to, articulate their own why that's a little more specific to their role or to their specific contribution that they make to the whole. The idea, if you imagine sort of the imagery of a tree, right? If the organization as a whole is the tree, that tree may have several branches, and each one of those branches is a different business unit or a different organization within that larger whole. and each one of those can articulate its own why, but it still ties into the root of the entire whole. And then, within those, depending on the size of the organization, you might have nests on those branches where you've got, smaller teams within those divisions. And those, if they choose to, can articulate their own why as well. And then the individual birds sitting in those nests are the individuals within each of those teams or business units. The idea being that each of us individually has our own why. And the goal is to have to be sitting in a nest that inspires us, that where our why aligns with the nest in which we sit, on the branch on which we sit, and the entire organization that we're a part of.
Yeah, and that, I guess, aligns with something that has become popularized in the last few years in startup circles, the North Star metric, something that a former guest of mine, Sean Ellis, spoke about, where, hey, your startup or your business should be focused on this one North Star. And say your Airbnb and your North Star is all about nights booked, but you also have a number of sub-metrics, such as nights returned. Because if you're just focused on nights booked and the experience is lousy, then over time you're not going to have many nights returned and you're going to stop having nights booked. So in this case, You basically say you've got this North Star why effectively for the organization. That's what everybody is working towards. But below that, you have, say, these sub whys in different divisions or departments within the organization, and people have their own whys. And then at the individual bird level, as you put it, you've got your own personal why. But it all is geared towards that overarching why that the organization is working towards.
Exactly.
Yeah, fantastic. And on that individual bird, this is one of the last things I wanted to touch on, David. If I am an individual bird working in an organization who has a particular why that doesn't align with my personal why, but I'm not in a position to leave right now for whatever reason, financial or otherwise, what should I do?
This actually comes up a lot. And it comes up usually at the beginning of an individual why discovery workshop that we do with birds inside an organization. And the question that they have is, what if I discover my why and it doesn't align with my job? And so the first thing that we say is, just let's not make any silly decisions. It doesn't mean you have to fly out of the nest right away. If you feel like, so a couple of things can happen depending on, again, the size of the organization. Let's assume that there are a couple or three branches and a few nests in the tree. If there is, if you feel like you fit in the tree, if you feel like you're a good fit for the organization, you align with the organization's why, but where you are, the branch on which you're sitting perhaps is just not the right place for you. The opportunity is to find a different nest or find a different branch that perhaps aligns more with your personal why.
Yeah.
That's option number one. Option number two is kind of going back to the idea that it's not necessarily about the job you do. It's about how you show up to that job, because your why is not specific to your role. Your why applies inside of work as well as outside of work. And it's really, again, the contribution and the impact that you make on the lives of people. So perhaps if you shift your perception a bit and show up to your current role in a different way, and rather than saying, man, I hate my job, saying, how can I show up and live my why in my current role, you might find that it's actually not that bad.
Yeah.
The third thing is, let's say that you do happen to work in an environment that is toxic, that's not a great place for you to be, where you're not thriving, and you try some of these things and they just don't work. Well, at that point, you certainly have a decision to make. And it may just be that there's a different tree that might be a little better fit.
Mm-hmm. No, love that. And on the second point there, I think reframing is just so powerful. I was having a conversation with a entrepreneur the other day, and she was saying how, she'd started a business previously and it failed, and now she's scared to go ahead with it because she's scared that, ultimately it will hurt her ego, her pride will get hurt. And I said, look, talking about ego is a totally different conversation, but ultimately I said, well, you just want to reframe it, right? You want to learn to just go in there and see it as an opportunity to continue learning. I'm sure you got a lot of learnings out of your first failure, which you'll put into practice now, but go in there and say, hey, I'm going to go through this and I'm going to learn. I'm going to take small steps. I'm not going to overcommit or over-invest in any particular idea. And then you can't fail, because everything you do is going to ultimately, well, you'd like to think so, help you learn something. But if you go in there and say, well, I can't fail because then my ego is going to get hurt and I'm not going to be able to, back myself going forward in other ventures in life, then that's obviously a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is tough. I mean, a lot of times this is a leap of faith, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't know if this is going to work. We don't, and ego is a huge thing, but being able to sort of, again, this goes back to the humanness of this whole message, is just realizing that this is messy human stuff. Yeah. And at the end of our careers, the end of our lives, we're going to look back and we're going to think we are going to be most fulfilled if we were doing something that mattered and that had meaning. And if we just, stayed in a job that we hated because we wanted to save our ego, that's not going to probably be the best decision once we look back on it.
Yeah, well, ultimately prevent us from becoming the best versions of ourselves. So with
Indeed.
3.5 minutes to go, David, I've got to throw you into our 3-question lightning round. Are you ready to rock and roll?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's do this. Question number 1, Dave, is if you could work for any organization at any stage of the company lifecycle, so we could go back to the 1975 Apple computer, who would it be and why?
This is such a you're gonna think this is a cop-out answer. I cannot imagine doing anything other than what I'm doing right now.
Hey, that's a great answer.
I absolutely love my job. I love my organization. I love the people that I work with. I would not change a thing.
Well, given the topic of today's conversation, I'd be disappointed if that wasn't your answer. Question number 2 is, if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask? A little bit more challenging.
Wow. There's something around, I would love to sit down with the founding fathers of the United States and just talk to them a little bit more about what do you envision this country being like in 500 years?
Yeah, that's a great one.
I think they gave us a pretty good idea, and yet I would have loved to pick their brains on it a little bit more.
Yeah, and even just what would they think or make of your country today?
Yes.
Is this what they envisaged, or is it completely different? Has it gone off the rails?
Yeah, pretty sure that would be the right answer.
And lucky last, Dave, do you have any daily rituals or routines that help you stay on top of your game?
Yes, it's something that I recently started, but it's been really, really helpful. Is I set an alarm for myself every day at 5:31 p.m. My alarm goes off, and I stop whatever I'm doing, and I just take 3 deep breaths, and just sort of take in where I am, what I'm doing, and just have a sense of gratitude for what I have.
Love it, perfect. Well, our audience can pick up a copy of the book on Amazon. They can find out more about the work you're doing and the work Simon's doing over at startwithwhy.com. They can also check out the podcast on iTunes, Start With Why, and they can hit you up on Twitter at DJ Mead. That's DJ MEAD. Is there anything else they should be checking out, Dave?
I think if you go to startwithwhy.com, that will point you in all the right directions that you need to go. I think that's the hub for, that's the best place to go.
Perfect. All right. Well, any parting words of wisdom for our audience?
Life is too short. And so it's so important to find that meaning, that purpose, that fulfillment that we seek. And it really comes from living a life in service to others and figuring out what our specific contribution can be to that is really what leads us to that we're looking for.
Beautiful. Couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you so much, David, for appearing on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you, Steve.
Hey guys, it's Steve again. If you're picking up what we're putting down, we'd love it if you took just a minute of your time to like, share, or subscribe to Future Squared on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. It would mean a hell of a lot to the team here who work effortlessly to bring you thought leaders and experts on topics of corporate innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement on a weekly basis. As always, you can find more resources on innovation, including blogs, books, podcasts, videos, webinars, and tools at www.collectivecamp.us. If you'd like to connect with me on Twitter, you can do so at Steve Glaveski. That's Glaveski. Until next time, keep innovating. Future Squared out.